All right, today in database and SQL, here are some of the things that we worked on. So, database, SQL. First of all, we talked about the quiz. We reviewed the quiz and went over items with that. Then we talked about conceptual models. A conceptual model would be the entities and the relationships between them. You don't worry about the attributes inside. You don't worry about that yet. So it's the entities. So what we did from the quiz, on the quiz we said what would the entities be for a library. And the students came up, and then we talked about it, and we said books, the clients or the people who check out the books, and the checkout list. Okay, the checkout list. Then we connected a relationship between those. Clients check out books, so there's a relationship here of books to here. Then, you may or may not notice it here, this is a one-to-one relationship. One book can be checked out, assuming you don't have multiple copies of the same book. But even if you did that, you would list them separately. You would list those separately. So a client, one client can check out many books. Now there might be a limit in the real world, but in our case we said there's a relationship. A client can check out many books. So in this entity where we're keeping track of what's checked out, you could have multiple clients that have checked out books. But each book can only be checked out by one person. So that's a concept. That's a conceptual database, or the conceptual view or schema of the database. Okay? Then we move from there, and let me use the black now. We move from there, and we talked about the logical. The logical, then, we would start listing some attributes, like books would have an ISBN number, a title, a genre maybe, and so forth. Clients, they would have some kind of ID number, maybe they'd have an address, maybe an email, and maybe a phone, okay, and so forth. Then checkout would have the attributes you would put in for checkout. Okay? And there'd be some foreign keys in there. Okay, the foreign keys like what's used here and maybe the ISBN number. So that's a logical view. We haven't broken down the specific attributes details, but we've listed them, and then we verified the relationships. We verified these relationships between here. All right. Third one I'll do in blue. And then we get what we might call the physical view. The physical view, now we would take these attributes and we would define them. We would say what type they are, and then we would also talk about any possible constraints on them, and we would list them exactly. This would list the exact table name. Then we would list the exact attribute name as it's going to appear in the table, and we would indicate what type it was going to be, and then if there are any constraints. For example, we could say the client ID number, or the person checking out, the ID number has to be a certain number of digits. Okay? Phone numbers have to fulfill a certain range of items. Okay? Then even things, let's say we gather in here, let me put it in black here. Let's say we gather date of birth. Okay? Now, we could actually put that in, mention a certain range that can be. Okay? List a certain group that can fit into, because maybe nobody would have been born before 1900. Okay? Or maybe there's only a certain number of genres that the book can be. Okay? It could be fiction, nonfiction, and a couple other genres maybe. So when we label those things, we can say there's a domain that particular attribute fits into. More or less, this is the items it could be and not beyond that. Another example would be address in here. United States. We have a domain. If you're from the United States, there's only so many states that you can pick from. You can't pick a state that isn't one of the United States. Okay, so that's this whole concept. And then we talked about, the last thing I'll mention here, we talked about views. You can take all of your information here and put it into a view. And the view can look like another table. And then this is what outside people can see. They can see that view. Or when they look at it, they see it from, well, that's the best way to put it. They see it from a view where they don't maybe see the exact tables, but they see the results of some of the tables. They see the results of some of the tables, and you can put that as a view so the users see that. So you'll hear us talk about what the users, you hear us talk about, as an example here, I'm over here on the right, you could have what the users, what they see, and then we have the logical, what we're working with, down to the actual physical, how it's stored, or at least close to how it's stored. All right. Then today we looked at what would be an example of some conceptual view of a nonprofit. Nonprofit we used today was maybe a church, as an example. So the students came up with this. They came up, there would be members of the church, employees, and then they kind of wrestled with what happens if the employee was also a member and so forth. The church would probably have expenses, and then the church would have donations. Then in here we created a relationship. One member can make many donations. Okay? But any one donation, of all these donations, can only have one member that made a donation. You can't tie it together. And that would be a rule for this particular database. And then if you left these separate, an employee could make a donation. All right. So without worrying about attributes, first thing you do is try to develop a conceptual schema or model so you can look at what you might need. What do you look at? For a database, the first thing you want to know is what information you want out. What information does a company need? Company or individual or business or whatever it might be. Then you decide what data you're going to put in and what process it's going to take to produce the information. And then from there, you can build a conceptual model. You start building a model of how it might look. But until you know what is wanted, what is needed to get there, it's hard to build the model. It's hard to build a model. The last thing I'll mention, we talked about our project of doing some work for a company locally. And so the students are researching FRC Corp here in Mason City. They make antennas for large aircraft. So you can look that up online. You can look up some of the antennas. We talked about that in class. And so on Monday, we're going to share what information we found on this particular company. And they sell antennas to Rockwell Collins and Honeywell, who sell them then to like Boeing and the big companies that sell. We will eventually, in a couple weeks, we'll go and visit and tour, and then we'll talk to them about the requirements. And that's where we'll gather then that information. And the first database we're going to work with is already created, and we're going to add value to it. They have some things they want to accomplish from it, and so we're going to take what they already have and add some value to that. And then that's it for today.